Is on its own. Tito wants to use Yugoslavia as a platform for him to play a world role. He hasn't been able to do it in the communist world, so he's going to do it in the so-called Third World.
In 1961, Marshal Tito invites 25 heads of state to Belgrade for a summit conference of non-aligned nations. The meeting is significant because a neutralist Third World is established and takes its place beside the free and communist worlds.
At home and abroad, Tito won over people by sharing their concerns. His past as a poor farmer's son and common laborer kept him attuned to the working man. He was wealthy and powerful, but his unabashed delight in luxury only deepened his connection with Yugoslav peasants. If they were rich, they would have enjoyed life in the same ways he did.
He liked to wear nice clothing. He came from peasant stock. They didn't have nice clothing, and when he could afford it, many people who come from poor families like to dress up, and he liked to do that too. Tito enjoyed putting on black tie and being at a party along with any other swells who wore black tie. Why not? That's the way the diplomatic corps did it. He didn't mind doing that.
Even his reputation as a ladies' man endeared him to his countrymen.
I remember being in Belgrade, and I was in a cinema, and the newsreel came on, and Tito was shown surrounded by very beautiful Turkish women, and looking at them with some animation and excitement. Everyone in the audience was shouting out and whistling, and they were shouting things like, "Give her one for me, old man," you know, and things like that. Slightly obscene, but very friendly. And I thought, well, this is very curious. You wouldn't hear this shouted out about most dictators in a cinema, you know. But they identified with Tito.
Such was his reputation for virility that even as an old man in his 80s, rumors abounded of his affairs. For his wife Jovanka, it was too much to take.
She was madly jealous and thought he was having affairs with all these other women. And she really got on his nerves, and it began to affect his health. And on one occasion, he got so exasperated, he bashed his stick on the ground and broke it. Then his advisor said, "Look here, you must separate."
Tito's personal authority kept his country unified. He recognized always that religious divisions lay just below the surface and acted swiftly to crush any separatist uprising.
We would see the beginnings of some nationalist expression in Croatia, for example, where some of the Croat leaders would begin to talk in much more nationalistic terms about Croatia. And when that happened, Tito stepped in very fast, and people lost their jobs. 20 years earlier, they probably would have lost their heads.
Tito dreaded the prospect of a divided Yugoslavia, but had no secret formula for the future. When he died in 1980, at age 88, Yugoslavs were devastated.
Tito's posthumous life goes on for about 10 years. The collective leadership almost pretends that Tito is still there. The slogan is, after Tito, ? Tito. After Tito, Tito. Tito lives on after he is physically dead, as if, he was still inspiring them from the other world.
Suddenly, the cult of Tito was no longer enough to sustain the country. With the end of the Cold War, foreign aid plummeted. The economy collapsed. Religious fanaticism exploded. Yugoslavia was torn apart by civil war.
Tito was right that the one thing you had to try to prevent was the rise of this nationalism, and because once it started, it was likely to lead to the slaughter and genocide, if you will, that we've seen since. It's a tragedy, but it's one the Yugoslav peoples have done to themselves.
In his birthplace in Kumrovec, there's a visitor's book, And when I went there the last time in September 1993, the day before, there'd been an entry by somebody, a Muslim from Bihać. When you were alive, I walked on 2 legs. Now I walk on 1. Come back, Tito, and end this war.
Today, Tito is all but ignored in Yugoslavia. His name like a distant echo from another century. Ironically, the man who cared so deeply for his homeland is best remembered by foreigners.
I have to put Tito in the group of world leaders that we all are familiar with, whether it's de Gaulle, Churchill, Roosevelt, Stalin. He was in that group. He affected events. He built Yugoslavia. He became a world figure, and he must rank with those world leaders.
Tito's break with Stalin was the first crack in the monolith of international communism. Many consider it the initial step in the long process that culminated with communism in ruins and the collapse of the Soviet Union. By winning independence for his own land, he had triggered the slow death of his most cherished ideal.
He was the first man who really stood up to the Russian attempts to dominate Europe after the Second World War. And he really broke the whole idea of international communism. He started off as a communist himself. He was the destroyer of communism.